people don't realize there's going to be a lot of perceived failure in the process. So what do I mean by failure? Not getting a job right away. So, when you read LinkedIn, you see a lot of, I got the job. You don't see people saying, I didn't get the job, right? You see, I got the job. And that's the only data point you see. So you're assuming this person went after a job and they got it.
Welcome to Veteran CEO Magazine, where veterans lead the way. Today, my guest is Pat Hubbell. Pat is the co-founder and director of Canodorful, an organization that connects military veterans with qualified interviewers to practice interviews and really to nail that interview. Pat has over 17 years of experience coaching soldiers, veterans, young professionals, and career transitions at Cornell, PRTM, and Keystone Strategy. Pat, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jay. This is such a great opportunity. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, Pat, when the way VCEO does these interviews is every single first question is the same theme. It's to describe that military transition to civilian life in 6 words or less. And you work very closely with a lot of military veterans who do this. So I have a similar question for you. In your experience working with these veterans, what sticks out to you the most?
I appreciate the question. I think it's great. I'm going to do something that I think is kosher to do when people are preparing and meeting with people for interviewing, for example. So I'm going to look down at my notes. So I thought about this ahead of time, and I appreciate this because I have such a great opportunity to work with a wide variety of people, transitioning military, veterans, military spouses, Guard, Reserve, and coming up with 6 words for all of them is tough, but I think I've got it for you. So let's start with impressive. Asset. Career ready, not job interview ready, and grateful.
Let's start by talking about Canodorful. What led to the desire to make this organization?
That is really a fun question. I'm really glad to be asked that question. So part of it's my own personal soul searching. Part of it's a new awareness at the time of a need. But I had myself, I'm not a veteran, I'm not a military spouse. My dad was a fighter pilot in World War II. We were raised on really cool stories of a young man learning to fly a Stearman and P-47, AT-6. So we were raised very respectful of the veteran and the military impact, the positive military impact. But I had a normal corporate career, and I ended up in a role at Cornell's MBA program after a stint of staying home with my then teenage daughter. I'd had a terrible time transitioning back into the workforce, despite an engineering degree and an MBA from MIT Sloan. I had what I would consider a good pedigree, but a horrible time getting back into the career world. Accidentally got networked into this role at Cornell, where I met a ton of students, and we worked with them on a lot of aspects of careers, including mock interviews. And during the process, because there's that engineer in me, I wanted to figure out what was making the greatest impact on our students in terms of their career readiness. I'll tell you, mock interviews, when we used to run these programs, were really intensive, and they were actually difficult to organize. So I went after the data associated with that, and I compared students who didn't participate in mock interviews and to those who did participate, hoping we wouldn't see much difference, I have to admit, because I was going to make a case for taking out this very expensive methodology. But instead, I found that students who participated in our mock interviews were twice as likely to land their desired job and did it 6 months faster than the students who didn't participate. So it's like, okay, we actually need to do more of these. And I realized if we we're going to do more of these, we needed to figure out a better way to run these programs so that they weren't as taxing, if you will. And I used the opportunity to work with IT to develop somewhat of a platform for alumni to volunteer certain hours, students to go in and grab those hours. So semi-automated it. Left that job, went on to Keystone Strategy, a really cool company out of Boston, San Francisco, New York City, doing a lot of different consulting gigs. But one of the things that was a hot topic there was double-sided platform, Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, et cetera, and the importance and how scalable they were. So after a couple of years with them, I'd kind of put these pieces together where imagine a situation where we could get a large group of people that wanted to help other people and connect them using double-sided platform technology with people who needed this help. Meanwhile, a student I'd worked with at Cornell's MBA program, Pete Sukitz, who had been transitioning out of the military by way of that Cornell MBA. He called me and we started noodling on these ideas. And we decided that bringing this to the veteran community would be something that would feel really good. It'd be incredibly impactful. And what a cool challenge to try to develop this thing. So that's where the whole thing came from. We started thinking about this in 2016. We incorporated in 2017. We joined a Mass Challenge accelerator in 2018 to get ourselves deep into the startup world. And we support 180 people in 2018. And this year we'll probably hit 1,200 people we supported in the year.
1,200 veterans just this year alone.
Yes, veterans, military spouses, yes.
You talked about being able to transition twice as fast in 6 months faster. I think that really emphasizes the point on just like how much time people need to prepare ahead of time.
This is a really excellent point, Jay. So first of all, just to be clear, that is actually based on an MBA student's career path, and it isn't entirely transferable, but the point is still valid, right? So it is unlikely that this is where I feel like such a bubble burster, Jay. So this is kind of like the bad news. So hopefully we'll do a lot more good news after this, but there is no leaving the military and landing a job the next day. I suppose 1 in a million chance that could happen, but that isn't going to be how it happens. In fact, the two major points that I like to make with people is that networking is essential. We all know that, but very few of us really know what networking means and how to do it. It's one thing to hear you're supposed to do it. It's another thing to sit down and do it. The second piece is people don't realize there's going to be a lot of perceived failure in the process. So what do I mean by failure? Not getting a job right away. So when you read LinkedIn, you see a lot of, I got the job. You don't see people saying, I didn't get the job, right? You see, I got the job. And that's the only data point you see. So you're assuming this person went after a job and they got it. Reality is, if they're doing it right, my data would show that they networked with 100 people / companies. It's a lot. And they probably, or they attempted to network with 100, but they probably made contact with 20 to 50. They probably had 3 interviews and got 1 offer. So that's a huge funnel, right? So that takes time. So getting back to the twice as likely 6 months sooner, you need to start preparing. If you're transitioning military, you need to start this process, in my opinion, 1 year away from the date that you want to be employed. Why? Because you need to learn all these pieces. You need to start networking. You need to work on the resume, which is not the most fun to work on. And I will always make a recommendation for the 2-Hour Job Search, which is a book all about networking written by Steve Dalton. And I can go into more detail about that if you're interested, Jay, but that is a great resource for transitioning military and military spouses.
Having to prepare way ahead of time, that's just one of those challenges. And you mentioned just that feeling of sometimes feeling like not successful right away. I'll talk about my personal experience here. When I like to say I had 2 transitions out of the military. My first one, where I was networked real closely with the people nearby where I was working, was able to quickly land a contracting job at the same place I was already working. And that was great. I mean, I got out of the military on a Friday, and then on a Monday, I came in civilian clothes for the contractor doing almost the exact same job. It seemed so easy. And then I moved to Texas because I had a life opportunity to go down there, continue some education, move closer to family. And that's what I would say was my real kick in reality for what my transition was. No network, trying to plan ahead of time, saving up a lot of money before that, just trying to make sure that I was ready for a period where maybe I'm not, where I wasn't going to be working. And then realizing, man, I'm glad I saved up what I did, but I probably should have saved even more for it. So those are challenges I experienced that I can relate to very closely. Well, are there other challenges that you hear from veterans that appear most often?
That's another really good question. You're kind of getting right to the heart of the matter. So I would say, and this is a little bit repetitive, I apologize for that. I think a lot of veterans are unprepared for the process that they need to go to, so what networking is, and the amount of time that takes, hours per day, time that takes, and therefore how that translates to the number of days, months, etc., that it's going to take to get to the other side of it. I think they're also unprepared for how distressing that can be, because as I said, it feels like failure. It's not, it's part of the process, because you're trying to be the number one pick in a large crowd of good people. And, stats would just say you're not going to be the number one pick every time. So I think there's a lot of lack of preparation. Also, I think here's a new thought for you. I think the process can be very isolating because you're having rejections. You don't know who to talk about, or perhaps your way is to not talk about it. And you don't recognize that this is actually fairly normal. And I encourage people to find accountability partners, like other people going through the same things. So you can kind of be like, oh crap, I just had the worst networking call. I definitely didn't do it right. And have someone kind of be there to build you up, and likewise to that person. And I encourage veterans to also, or transitioning military, to look at the resources that are out there for support. So Veterati is another great one. 4Block, Hiring Your Heroes, the Commit Foundation. There's a lot of people that they're not going to give you the final solution, but they're going to provide support. And I've seen a lot of veterans use multiples, not just one, but multiples. And then military spouses, similarly, there's more and more programs supporting military spouses. Terrible 26% unemployment rate, but there are a lot of opportunities out there. And advocating for yourselves, not yourself as part of a military family, but for yourself, learning to do that, getting permission to do that is a new concept. So, find the programs, ask a lot of questions, come through Canodorful.
You mentioned it about, it's not just veterans, it's the military, it's the veteran spouses as well. Are there unique challenges that the spouses face at the veterans, but between the veterans and the spouses? They
are unique. They are different, and they overlap to some degree, but they are different. Veterans typically need to be given permission to talk about themselves. They don't like it. They're uncomfortable with it. It's not part of the military culture. It is essential in an interview to do that. That would probably be the same for military spouses as well. Veterans need to translate their language so that it's understandable to people who are not in the military. And veterans need to be given permission to talk about their military experiences in common language. Military spouses is a little bit different. Quite often, they're very worried about gap years or gaps in their resume, very, very common. And there's such a fear that it's going to be held against them that they either don't explain it or they get stuck in the explanation. They make it bigger than it is. And learning to explain it, I shouldn't even say explain it, to acknowledge it, to then explain it, and then move along is probably one of the biggest assets that we can provide our military spouses. And then also encouraging them to do some soul searching about what do you bring to the table? What are your skills, your superpowers? Because you're not just the spouse of a military person, which tends to be what they talk about. Mm-hmm. My husband, my wife is in the military. That tends to be their leading question. And that's valuable, and it's really important. It's something to be proud of. It's not part of what you bring to the table on a job.
With Canodorful, I know that you guys have a specific method that you use to help teach people with this interview process. Can you describe a little bit about that method and really what led to its development?
Absolutely. So Canodorful is hyper-focused on the job interview piece of the job search. There are a lot of pieces in the job search. We focus on one. So we absolutely encourage everyone to come through Canodorful, but also, again, I encourage them to also join more holistic programs like 4Block, Hiring Your Heroes, and Commit Foundation, and there's many more. But when it comes to actually doing interviews, you want to be very, very familiar with being in the hot seat, with dealing with the fight or flight feeling, because you can't fight and you can't flight. You have to sit there and be prepared and calm down. And we simulate that experience for you. So the process is first to do an intake. And if people want to come do that with Canodorful, they can go to our website, Canodorful, CANDORFUL.org. And they can choose the Get Started tab at the top and choose Military Connected Community. And then it'll be pretty obvious what to do from there. But then they'll choose an interview coach or a time and date, and they will do a 30-minute intake with us. And during that intake, we will run through what to expect out of the Canodorful program, and we will start giving tidbits of information about how to be a good interviewee. After that meeting, or during that meeting, they'll actually receive the next steps, which is to sign up for, we encourage at least 3 practice interviews. And so we want each of our candidates to meet with 3 different coaches. And in those sessions, they'll do a 30-minute interview, and it will be, to the best of our coach's ability, a realistic interview, realistic questions. You won't know them ahead of time, because in an interview, you won't know them ahead of time. And then at the end of the 30 minutes, the coach will stop, and they will spend 15 minutes discussing how it went and answering questions, and perhaps even making you re-answer a question once you've gotten feedback. So that's about 45 minutes of time. It's scheduled for an hour, but 45 minutes of time you'll spend with a coach. Technically, at the 45-minute point, the coach will log off the video conferencing call with you and spend the remaining 15 minutes writing up the feedback, so you get it both verbally and in writing. One of the problems with our wonderful 140 volunteer interview coaches is they're very passionate. They're from amazing companies. They're very passionate. They may use the full hour, but they're supposed to stop at 45 minutes. But that's the process. They're very dedicated. They come from companies like PwC, Amazon, Oracle, Dell. I know I'm missing other important ones, but great organizations. They are professionals. All of them do interviewing as part of their real day job. So they're bringing the current questions that are out there in the universe, and they're bringing the feedback that they learn not only from their experience interviewing, but participating in hiring meetings where they hear other people's point of view.
Those practice interviews are so important. When I was finishing up at TCU, one of the things that I really made sure I took advantage of is they had career counselors that offered that exact same thing. So as I was nearing graduation and I knew it's time to jump back into the workforce, I was looking at jobs and contacting them all the time. Hey, what do you think of this? How can I build my resume for it? But let's practice these interviews to really nail it, because I had interviews that I had done where I just absolutely out of the gate fell on my face. First question. And after that, it was so hard to recover.
You're shook up at that point. You're shook up.
I guess a question from there is, are there particular questions that are more important than others?
I think every question's important, and your reaction to them is important as well. And even if you don't know the answer, there's a reason they're asking these questions, right? So even if you don't know the answer, the ability to stay calm and think about how you can answer it with honesty and certainty is really valuable. And again, that comes from practicing with people and people who are in industry, not just people who do it as counseling. It's really important, like you mentioned, as part of the program. And that's what we did at Cornell, right? We were helping students that way, but we used to bring in the alum, because those were the people out there interviewing people. And that's the model here, is we're using people from industry who know what the trends are, what the questions are. But now let me give you a more literal answer. So the organizations, if they bring you in to interview, they've already seen your resume and they know you have at least the basic skills to do the job. They're already to that point. The question is, now they're looking at, do you fit with the organization, right? So how you answer questions becomes important, and they're looking for people who can solve problems. So using examples where you solve problems, they're looking for people who get along with other people. So perhaps bringing with you, examples of how you dealt with a difficult personality or someone very different than you, but were successful or eventually became successful at doing it. And I think a lot is pulled into the problem solving and getting along with people. But then, if you've actually read the job description, which you definitely should have, and you've read the culture of the company from the website, which you should have, you'll find other areas or other clues where things you want to bring to the forefront.
That seems to really be what you were talking about, between that difference between career ready versus job interview ready.
Right. So I'm glad you gave me the chance to explain that. So I have met so many amazing veterans and military spouses, and I've met even more non-military. And there's no doubt that the percentage of career-ready folks coming out of the military is incredibly high. There's no doubt in my mind. But the people in the corporate world do interviews from their first internship in college all the way until whatever age they are at that point, right? So they are getting experience saying, tell me about yourself and how would you deal with a difficult person and what's your greatest weakness, and all myriad of questions. They're getting that practice throughout their career. But the military, who are very career ready, in fact, they're probably used to working with lower than required resources, getting problems done in creative ways, probably maybe even excelling over their corporate counterparts. But what they don't know is how to sell themselves in an interview. They don't know what's kosher. They don't know what the guardrails are. They don't know, is it okay to talk about myself? Do I have to put this in only team? Probably not even thinking about it. They're probably just putting things in team format because that's the culture of the military. And who doesn't want to work with someone who thinks in terms of team? But Jay, if I only talk about my team when I'm interviewing, the interviewer has no idea what I did. And if they don't know what I did, if they don't have data, they can't hire me. They just can't do it. So giving permission to the transitioning military and the military spouse to talk about their accomplishments in terms of a significant amount of I, not we, becomes very important.
It sounds like a lot of it is understanding really, your career value and really your level to the position you're applying for. And something I've heard before that's come up is, well, I'm in the job field. I need a job now. So they take the first thing available that might be below a level that they're really there to do. What are your thoughts on doing that?
That's tough. And I don't think there's an easy answer. So I respect that there is a need sometimes to get a job to keep food on the table, right? So when military transition out, there can be at a very high pressure point, multiple kids, maybe some even in college or headed to college, financial pressures are real. I often hear people esoterically writing articles about if you find your dream job, you'll never work a day in your life. And I love the concept. I really, really do. And here's another bubble bursting moment. I apologize to everybody. I am very lucky. I work at Canodorful more than 40 hours a week by far, but it's something I do with some level of sacrifice, right? Because I built it myself and we're growing it from the ground. If I was trying to do this when my daughter was approaching college, the answer would be no. I couldn't do this. So Canodorful is now my dream job. I'm in my 60s. It's a different thing. If I was 45 or 50 with a college education coming, I would have to go for a job that paid more than this. And I might be making a decision between my alleged dream job, if there's such a thing, and a job that's paying more. Or I might be struggling with the job search and not coming up with anything. And as you point out, I get an offer that is 1 or 2 levels below what I think I should be. It's a hard decision. So this is why I'm giving a very indirect answer. This is why it's important to be networking with multiple companies. My 2-hour job search reference, Steve Dalton, will tell you to be working on 40 companies at a time, kind of in parallel to some degree. Because if you get that one offer, you need to know that, oh my gosh, this isn't quite right, but I've got 2 more interviews coming up, so I'm going to try to hold them off. And you may end up having to choose that low ball offer, and I hope you don't. Don't forget to negotiate on salary. Don't forget to talk to them about, if you take this job, what is the career path? How quickly will you be reviewed for opportunity for promotion? And I respect that you might have to do that. Always be networking so that if you are in a position where you do this, you are continuing to network. So after you give that company a reasonable amount of time, say a minimum of a year, perhaps aiming towards 2, you've networked yourself into something that is at the right level, and you recover from that.
I know some people just hate networking. I myself am one of those people because it can be exhausting both mentally and emotionally to constantly doing it. But it is one of those things where it can come back around over and over again throughout your life. Maybe even today, the people you're interacting with today, years down the line, maybe.
Absolutely. In fact, don't forget it's a 2-way street, right? So you may be networking thinking, oh my God, I feel guilty because I really, really want to know this person has a job. Remember, that person may come back to you someday. So it's a 2-way street. It's an opportunity to get to know people, learn about their career, their company, and build your knowledge, which who doesn't like to talk to somebody about what they've learned? if somebody calls me and wants to network, I have a networking call this afternoon, to tell you the truth. Somebody wants to know more about one of my past experiences. I'd love to tell them about it. I think it's an exciting thing to do. It makes me feel important. It makes me feel good. So usually it's not as big an ask as you may feel it is. Not everybody will respond. Not everybody will be informational. And again, the book actually goes through this, and the author handles it beautifully. I think the difficulty with networking is not everybody knows what it is. Some people think I'm just going to make connections on LinkedIn. That's networking, and there's so much more to it. That's like the first baby step. So really learning what it is, talking to people, learning that process, reading the book, and following the process of coffee chats and connections, and it'll happen. It will happen.
I got one more question about just the knowing how to prepare for particular questions. And this is a method that I had learned when I was preparing. It was called the PEN method. Have you heard of this method before?
I am not familiar with the PEN method. Tell me about it, Jay.
So the PEN method is about the first question that you're coming up to is having a strategy on how to answer it. And what PEN stands for is passion, experience, and what's next. So that first question that almost always comes up is, tell me about yourself. And I mentioned before that this is one that I absolutely flopped on out the gate. And I stumbled, and then I had to restart it. And by then it was already over. But after I learned this method, it was a really great strategy, because I was able to go into it and say, this is what I'm passionate about and how that relates to that job and that career that I'm in. Here's my experience behind it, however many years or minutes I have with it. And then what I'm looking to do with that passion and experience is what's next, what's here at the career that I'm looking to do. Those three things in a first question takes about 30 seconds. I have found it to be a pretty successful method.
That's awesome. What's nice about that is if you lead with passion, with the passion piece of that, your demeanor is going to change while you're talking. It's going to go to excitement, which is going to mean that person's going to engage with you and you're going to start to relax. I think that's the kind of the psychological transition that will happen. So, but also to do that well, you need to research the company so you can connect your passion with what they're saying, and therefore you're more prepared and feeling more confident. So, and then it will add to that the experience piece. You got to articulate the important parts of your experience that link with the job that you're interviewing for at that very time. So again, following this method and relating it to the job description in the company is really, really very valuable. And obviously, next step should be aligned with the role that you are interviewing for, which kind of brings them right back. So talking about my passion, talking about my experience, and what's next is this. And that's like handing the ball back to them. Okay, hit me with some more questions.
We've talked about different types of questions. We've talked about knowing your position and how to translate that into the career. And then also with the networking time about how that's kind of a continuous thing. So, knowing that there's people at all sorts of different stages, thinking about those veterans who haven't quite got out yet, or maybe thinking about getting out. What are some things that you recommend they do while they're still in the military to set them up for that successful transition?
So I'm a big fan of preparing 1 year out. It could even be 2 years out. It won't hurt you. I'm very tactical when it comes to this, but I would start talking to people, like this is early pre-stage networking, talking with people who have transitioned out before you, or friends of the family that that are in industry, and learn what's out there. It's a little bit like a needle in the haystack. So just getting comfortable talking to people, especially strangers, is really very valuable. Then I would buy the 2-hour job search in parallel by Steve Dalton. It's about $15 on Amazon. I would not get Kindle. I would not do Audible in this case. I would get the book so you can write on little tabby notes and kind of keep referring to it. I'd read it cover to cover. I'd absorb it and use it as a workbook. And then I would start acting on it. There's no reason to not start that networking right away. And in parallel, maybe after you've kind of done that, at least 6 months out, doesn't have to be, but 6 months out, or maybe even a year out, practice with Canodorful, because where the rubber meets the road is the interview. And a lot of people are just massively nervous about this. And the nerves will get in the way. And that's probably what happened to you, Jay. And it happened to me during one of my last interviews in my recent career. I just all fell apart. And I know this stuff. I knew I was falling apart as it was happening, and I didn't get the job, and I knew it like 2 minutes in, I wasn't going to get it because I wouldn't have hired me. So practicing is important. So why not come through Canodorful, do 3 practice interviews? You can always come back and do it again as you get closer and kind of hone the more specifics about it. So that was asking people questions, buying the book, The 2-Hour Job Search, starting to practice with Canodorful, and starting your networking. And know that I keep hearing over and over again that the transition itself is incredibly hectic and incredibly time consuming. So if you push things off, you may not get to them. So there's some things you can do in advance, even if it feels early. Why not do them?
A lot of these questions you've really talked about, how people make themselves an asset, how they show the most impressive parts of their career. We've talked about the career ready and not job interview ready questions. But this last part I really want to ask you is gratefulness. You said grateful. What do you mean by that?
I'm going to sound probably really corny, Jay, when I say this, but I do love working with veterans, but perhaps it's not as generous as it sounds, because I also get a lot of good feels from working with veterans. So why is that? And military spouses, why is that? As a population, to me, they seem to be a group that is grateful and understands that they're lucky to have resources like Canodorful and like all these other wonderful resources out there. It is rare when I only do intake. I don't do interviews anymore because I'm building the business. But when I do intake, it is rare that it doesn't end with the veteran or the military spouse giving me a heartfelt thank you and kind words that make it so that here I am doing something and I walk away feeling uplifted by this person. So the gratefulness is something that culturally perhaps we've forgotten outside of the military. And so it's so lovely to see it and feel it from the wonderful veterans and military spouses. In fact, we just sent to all our sponsors and granting organizations a video of about 6 of our Canodorful alum from 2023 thanking us. And it's resonating really strongly with the folks that we work with, because, a lot of people don't take the time to thank. And this group of people seems to do that.
And it seems like such an easy thing to do, to add that thank part. But
absolutely.
A lot.
Spread the word, because we're doing good things and we have the capacity to do more of it. And thank you so much, Jay, for having me on.
Pat, thank you so much.